All right, so for those of you who may not know me, I'm Tim Siglin with Help Me Stream Research Foundation. We take old tech, repackage it into streaming solutions for those in emerging economies who've never had streaming. Dom and I wrote the original Greening of Streaming. And Dom yesterday brought me into a call with a group called iMasons. And I was not familiar with iMasons, but Dean, I'm assuming you're out there, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Doing well.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having us.
So real quick, tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, first off, what is really neat about this, I love listening to a whole different group with a whole different perspective that is fully aligned with what we're trying to accomplish. It's really neat. And then on a personal perspective, my daughter's in music, and in the last 2 weeks, she wrote a song for a K-pop group called Twice. And so thinking of streaming, it's they've gotten 28 million listens on Spotify, right? In the last 2 weeks, they have 55 million views on YouTube. So yep, there's a lot of streaming going on with that. Anyways, the group's called Twice, and she wrote that. She's in a girl group called Citizen Queen. And Adam, I think I picked up the same bug, whatever you had. So
I was gonna say, and you're an absolutely proud father from that standpoint.
Yeah, just a little bit. All right. So my name is Dean Nelson. I'm a longtime digital infrastructure person, been in it for 33 years. I started at Sun Microsystems back in '89. So I did 17 years at Sun, 2 stints. I had a startup company in the middle that I was working at called Allegro Networks. After Oracle acquired Sun, I went over to eBay, around global foundation services there for about 7 years. So that's data center network, hardware storage, software orchestration, basically bare metal management of the infrastructure. Then I took a break, took my daughter to find a college for 6 months, and then I joined Uber and rode that up, running the same thing, basically Uber metal infrastructure wise. And then I left on my 51st birthday, so did 30 years exactly in the buying side. Ran about $10 billion worth of infrastructure across 3 continents during that period, which is really fun. So I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. And then I stepped away and started doing advisory work, joining boards and that type of thing. And I stepped into a company right now that I lead called Cato Digital. And both Simon and Robert are involved with Cato Digital. Simon was also the executive director just with iMasons for 5 years. He stepped in after stepping away from iMasons, which is great. And I'll explain what we're doing with Cato Digital that's aligned with what we're talking about here. Another one I want to call out is Tom Orianne is a longtime iMasons member. We've known each other for a very long period. So it's great to see you on there. And Tom, we have to do a selfie at the end of this, okay?
Of course.
Well, and Tom, of course, got, I guess, introduced. Tom, didn't you, at IBC when you came to the meeting that we had with Akamai, and gave some really good feedback, liked it so much that helped Lumen join in.
Yeah, had to twist a few arms, but made it work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. And by the way, Dean, somebody tried to donate to us a Spark 3 the other day. And I was like, I remember going and physically getting those, there in the Bay Area. But I was like, I don't even remember how to boot up Solaris these days. So anyway, so let's talk about iMasons real quick, because I want to understand what that is since you've mentioned it.
Sure. Infrastructure Masons, or iMasons for short, is a professional association. So we basically are uniting the builders of the digital age. So that's everybody, right? Every aspect of whenever it leaves your phone or your device or your computer, everything after that to me is digital infrastructure. Towers, fiber distribution, huts, when it goes down to edge locations, to exchanges, to core data centers, to large data centers, small, all of that is basically delivering all the things that we use, right, from the internet itself. So we brought this group together. It was when I'd left eBay before I went to Uber. I set this back up because I wanted to get kind of a lot of my friends back together and start working on things. So really, community is a big deal for us. So we have 4 things we're focusing on. Education, specifically, to try and fill the funnel into our industry when it comes down to talent. Technology, of course. What are the things that can accelerate our other pillars as well? Sustainability and diversity and inclusion. So all of those things are very important to us, and they all tie together. And we basically leave our companies at the door. So we connect as professionals. So we come in, and our sessions are working sessions. So when we bring our members together, we have some intros and those types of things, and then we literally throw a question at them and have them break back out and provide direct feedback into it. And so it stimulates a whole bunch of other things, right? We're not driven by any other company. We have a whole bunch of foundation partners that help support the cause of what we're doing, but it is a member-led organization. I think very similar to what you guys are doing here, right? This is all about how do we go after this and make movement on these things. So that's the organization. We got about 7,000 people globally right now. What's insane to me is they represent probably $200 billion worth of infrastructure projects. So this is AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft. Just think of everybody you can, infrastructure-wise, they're involved with the organization that way.
And I think you hit a key point, which is people want to take action. That was one of the things with Greening of Streaming as we looked at it is we wrote the article, and then what we realized is it was becoming a movement pretty quickly. And so at the end of the day, it was, what can we do to take action? So iMasons, I now understand why Dom sort of saw the tie between iMasons and Greening of Streaming. One of the things you also mentioned was the climate accords, and most people here are familiar with that, but just if you want to do a quick overview of sort of the different states and the implications of those.
So again, if you think of the 4 pillars that we're going after, one of them is sustainability. And February 22nd last year, we pulled our advisory council together at Christian Bellatti's house. And Christian is a longtime executive. He works at Microsoft. He basically created PUE. And I'm sure people are familiar with PUE. When he was at HP, he worked with the Green Grid. So we've known each other for a long time. And he's one of the core founding members within Infrastructure Masons. And all of us were getting frustrated with the lack of progress when it came to sustainability. And, there are literally some of the biggest portfolios in the world represented within iMasons. So think about, Azure to all of the Microsoft properties, to Google Cloud, to everything that is Google and Alphabet, to AWS and Amazon, Apple, all of that. These are huge portfolios. So what we did is we pulled them together. We had about 40 people show up at his house. We spent 6 hours there, and we did this working session. And we all had one thing that we were going after. We had one question, which was, what can we do together, just one, to make material impact on, the carbon emissions within digital infrastructure? Just one. And it sounds easy. But boy, when you get that many executives in a room with that many different ideas, what was amazing is, they all came up. We had 6 themes that emerged out of that. And then the iMasons Climate Accord was born. And it simply was, if we all unite on specifically driving down for carbon neutrality as the first step towards net zero, it's a practical, real thing we can do. People are on different levels of the journey itself. But in the end of it, if everybody's got a clear definition of how, so think of a taxonomy or some type of carbon accounting methodology that we can have transparently that people can see, and we have a holistic measure of that, because we're basically going after carbon in materials, product, and power. That encompasses all, of digital infrastructure, embodied, and the carbon intensity of the energy that is actually consumed to do the work inside of these different locations.
So one of the stats you and I were talking about yesterday was that I think you said 45 million servers are being decommissioned this year. Is that an accurate number?
It is 43 million servers being retired over the next 4 years.
Over the next 4 years. And of course, what we're doing and trying to use some of those and repackage and solution, you also are doing something along those lines with Cato. So let's talk about Cato, because that's the for-profit side of what you're doing as opposed to just the iMasons piece.
Yeah, let me wrap on this first. I think it's really important to have a baseline, because whenever you're measuring, if the thing is moving, it's very hard to actually show progress. And one of the things that we did at the Climate Accord meetings was say, what is our industry? How big is our industry? And if you ask people, you get 100 different answers to it, because people are saying, well, it's data centers. Well, it's networking, Well, it's and of course, you guys have experience across all these different factors. And so we said, okay, digital infrastructure itself is represented right now by 7 million independent locations. Okay, this is everything from the box on the street corner, serving the different things that are happening within that metro, okay, small, all the way to the gigawatt campuses and everything in between. So the way we define this is that, again, whenever it leaves a device and goes out, when it hits that edge and everything that happens before it, we have to include. So that includes data centers, right? Telecommunications, all the data repositories, the internet exchanges, et cetera, because we kind of leave out all of it. So the numbers that we have now is 7 million unique locations. So think of a street address. I have an address for every one of these. Great, they're unique. They have 105 gigawatts of built capacity. Okay, this is the actual UPS equipment that's actually built up within these locations, okay? Power. They consume 594 terawatt hours of energy every year. 594 terawatt hours. That represents 2.4% of the global energy draw.
Mhm.
That's digital infrastructure. To get it broken down to simple things like that, we can have a real conversation. Okay. Now, in that infrastructure, we are sure there is a minimum of 37 gigawatts that's never used. I think this aligns really cleanly with what you guys are doing. You're talking about the energy efficiency and the consumption, right? And the use within streaming, right? And getting data. And I think it was Adam or somebody saying that you've got a thing called Prometheus that you're using to gather data around energy use.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So just think of it, if people were starting to publish the actual usage of this information or all of this portfolio, we could actually do something about it. And so what was really critical is we got companies to sign up for the iMasons Climate Accord, or the ICA, okay, based on that meeting at Christian's house. We now have over 200 companies that are represented within there. And this includes 4 founding members, which are AWS, Google, Meta, and Microsoft. They're on the governing body with myself, as well as Schneider Electric and Digital Realty. And we also have over 85, I think it is now, co-location companies signed up for it. Product companies, software companies, service companies, and financial institutions. So we're talking about like GI Partners and SIP and AOC Financing and Capital. Like these are people that actually fuse money into our infrastructure itself. And what was important is we're all unified. This is about carbon reduction inside of digital infrastructure. Okay. And it's all elements when you think of digital infrastructure, like I was outlining. So each of the companies have a commitment to what they're actually trying to accomplish. They're all, at different stages of the journey. So for example, Google has been carbon neutral since 2007. Okay, carbon neutral with offsets and other things, but does it include scope 3? Not yet. Scope 3 is very difficult, right? As we've been talking about. So each of the companies are doing that. So Tim, to tie it back to your other, I'll take off my professional association hat. Right.
Sure.
So I'm the chairman and founder of Infrastructure Masons, and we are very passionate about it. We leave our companies at the door. But now we have a very specific thing that we're going after that now we are okay with people having commercial interest in it, because the result is lower carbon. Whatever you're doing, however you're doing it, whatever money you're making, we don't care. Is it lowering carbon in digital infrastructure? Are we making progress towards the right thing? So what Simon and Robin and I are involved in is my startup company called Cato Digital. And what we are building to deliver for our portion of the Climate Accord as one of the 200 plus companies is low cost, carbon-free compute. Now I'm going to stop there because everyone else is probably saying, what the hell is carbon-free compute and how would you actually accomplish that? Okay, I'm sure, because that would be a question we get all the time. But again, we're taking the principles we outlined within the Climate Accord. Scope 3 is like usually everybody else's downstream problem, right? It's what you're receiving, what the embodied carbon is for people building up that. Part of this is that the servers we build, I believe, are one of the largest carbon impacts in digital infrastructure. And the reason for that, when you look at carbon accounting, if I build a building, that's like 40 years, okay? I'm putting concrete up, all right? Everything else, the copper, the steel, everything else to build that building. Those are the materials we talk about. Then I fill it up with mechanical, electrical, and other things to do air conditioning and all the other parts. So then you've got products inside, but that also includes the servers, the storage, the networking devices, everything that's in that building. So again, 7 million unique locations with a specific address, with a specific makeup of materials that built it, with a specific makeup of components or products that are inside of it, and a specific makeup of the source energy that is actually enabling that building to operate, and the mixture of the energy itself for it. So what we did is say, if you look at the life of a data center at 40 years for the building, then you start going backwards. Well, the generators are a 15-year depreciation, right? Useful life. Then you've got switchgear. Then you've got others. And then you get all the way down, you say, servers are 3 to 5 year depreciation.
Right.
That means they're refreshed 5 to 10 times within the life of that data center. So from a scope 3 standpoint, we're mining, right? Smelting, doing everything else to go build these servers. And then by the time they get to the site, that's when you start the energy consumption. But the embodied carbon history of those things, now we multiply 5 to 10 times over the life, because I'm going to refresh them. Happens all the time. So what we did is said, if we can now take that waste stream and turn it into a supply chain. So we're now taking second life equipment, hyperscale, think of Open Compute Project, what they drove. We're taking that in, we're renewing it, and we're redeploying it back into data centers. And we're working with the data centers using our software to unlock stranded power that they could never use with a lower SLA. So we have a 2.9 SLA. We're offering up this carbon-free compute because all the embodied carbon is paid for by the previous owner, which would be the hyperscales that had actually used the first life. Then we're using the wasted power in data centers that would never be used. Think of the redundant lineups. A 2.9 SLA means that I'm going to shut that off up to 7.3 hours a month. Well, then you start to think of who's going to use it. And if I've got many, many locations, just like AWS spot capacity or EC2, I can use those with a lower SLA. I get a higher resiliency when I'm using software at the upper layer. So we're pushing that out. Then the third block is using renewable energy or clean energy at the data center. So embodied carbon in the hardware goes to 0. Embodied carbon in the data center, because we're only using additive waste. Imagine you build 12.5 megawatts to sell 10, they use 5. We only want that 2.5 of redundancy at a 2.9 SLA that they would never actually sell. Additive. So there's 0 embodied carbon associated. And then, of course, the source energy. So for us, that's how we're going after scope 3 directly. And our plan is to put 1 million servers in 1,000 data centers. Because as I said in the beginning, Tim, there are 43 million of them being retired. Right. There's plenty of source. And by the way, being able to turn hardware and light it up in a data center in less than 2 weeks. How about supply chain constraints? So, right. And then costs, right? We start at half the price of cloud. Start.
So 2 final things here. One, what I find fascinating too, is we've gone through it from a nonprofit standpoint, is we're having the large providers say, hey, can we also give you the data racks? Can we give you other things like that? Because what they tend to do is sort of take the entire rack, shove it toward a recycler, and then of course you go through that process. The second thing is you mentioned power utilization versus power consumption. So do you think data centers have a power utilization issue, or do they have a, and I know that's essentially a softball question for you, but, and maybe you might want to paste in the link, in the links here, or send out to the group some of the things you've written about this, but let's talk about power utilization real quick before I hand it over for questions.
Absolutely. So this is one of my pet peeves in the industry. So I just posted this up. There's a magazine called Interglobix you should take a look at. This is one of the articles, latest articles that I wrote specifically around power capacity effectiveness. You got power usage effectiveness, which is the right side of the decimal. How much power is used for air conditioning, cooling, and everything else? How about the 1 in a 1.2? So power capacity effectiveness is simply how much capacity have you built? Think of all the UPS, redundancy, everything. How much do you use? Remember the 37 gigawatts I was talking about? We know in almost every data center in the world, their average is under 50% utilization of power. I'm talking about primary power that's delivered to the customers. And being a customer before, I didn't really focus on it. And we were part of the problem. We'd say, nope, we have 10 megawatt zones. We're putting, 576 racks in there, and they're going to be at this density. And it's my power. Nobody else can share it. Sounds like a
Right.
server. My power, I'm special. Nobody else can use it. What about virtualization? So we virtualize power to enable that to be opened up. The point is there's a gold mine of capacity and everybody's saying we're out.
Right.
Virginia, 2,000, right? Loudoun County, 2,000 megawatts allocated. There's no more power for 2 to 5 years.
Right.
There's 800 megawatts in Virginia never used.
In living on the southern end of Virginia, you know, there are a number of organizations that would love to figure out how to utilize some of that excess power. So I'm going to open it up for questions real quick. I know we're at the top of the hour. Did anybody have questions that they wanted to ask Dean?
Yeah, I've got one, if that's all right. Really interesting, Dean, and great to hear it. It's I work, some of the work I do is with a company that does scope 3 measurement, and so I'm kind of keen to know a little bit more. I know we focus on energy here, but is it right to, I've got 2 questions. I don't hear much about water usage whenever we're talking about these things. And is it right to assume that if you're taking 45 million servers out and you're basically refurbing servers to be reused, that there's a correlation between less water being needed to keep those servers cool because you're using less of them? Is that right or not? Or is that being measured as well? So that's the first question. Second question, are you doing full life cycle assessments on it? Because we do it with all sorts of products, but the digital piece is the holy grail for us, because there's not enough credible data out there to actually pin something on, and it would be great if you were to add to all of the other conversations, because I've got a very old school kind of analogy for you, is that whenever you put regrind vinyl into a vinyl, it's counted for in the virgin vinyl. So we already measure the cradle to grave, taking into account that the virgin pressing has already taken it up. So it's the same principle you're discussing. You're just reusing a server and the regrind is being used in the vinyl. But 2 questions. I don't know if you can help with any of that.
Yeah. So let me, sorry, again, Gary, I got your bug. Or Adam, sorry. Okay. So for the water side, the correlation here is really on the PUE element. So if I'm going to go back and consume power inside of a data center, I'm going to have a certain amount of infrastructure that's actually enabling the cooling. So from a PUE standpoint, that it's really summing up the room, and then you're zooming down into the different blocks of power, right, that's consumed, and it comes down to the delta T that's required in the servers. Meaning that as you pinpoint, what's the inlet temperature for that server? What's the rise of heat over time? And theoretically, there's going to be more water and power used in older equipment. Honestly, I think it is the water side, that's not true. And the reason is it's still a sum of the room itself. And it comes down to, are you running the right temperature? Are you containing? Are you doing all the things that would lower the amount of water? Okay. But there's always this tension between PUE and WUE. Because if you have a water-based cooling plant, you're going to use water. And so you're going to sacrifice one or the other. You're going to have a higher PUE to get a lower WUE. You're going to have a higher WE, you're going to have a higher PUE. So it really is a trade-off that you have to do. But I will tell you, the majority of our members in all new builds are waterless, closed loop systems, right? Because they all are challenged with the same thing: resources in region, power, space, water, fiber that's going to get to those locations. So they all have kind of set it up. And there's a guy named Martin Lynch that at the meeting with Christian, right, he said, we need to have a Bellevue water accord. So Bellevue is where he lives, right, where Christian lives. And in that, how many of us are signing up for waterless? So by the way, the climate accord is focused on carbon right now, but there's like 6 other parallel things, water being one of them, that are also important. So there's a lot of people that are doing this, right? It also goes down to generators and, right, getting out of this and trying to have different types of fuels to, do we even need the generators? So there's a lot of other parallel work that we believe is going to be additive to it. So does that help, Anthony, with the water side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the other things with hydrogen is it creates water. So,
Right.
So things in terms of the CDNs switching out of diesel into alternative power, then hydrogen seems to be the one that makes the most sense as an alternative renewable that can create water for the plant potentially.
Yeah.
So,
and here's the other thing is that another accord that we've been talking about is there's a whole bunch of people that are using HVO.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hydrogenated vegetable oil for generators instead of, right, diesel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we had at least 10 people are saying, we've already signed up to do it. We're already doing it. And they pushed and said, we need to talk to Rolls-Royce and all the other generator manufacturers and tell them to stop limiting it. Because they said, oh, you lower the capacity, you lower the life. We actually had Lex Kors from Digital, and we had Chris Crosby from Compass Data Centers. Both of them said, we did all the analysis. We actually did it. It actually increases the output, and it increases the life.
Yeah.
So this is not true. So then they said, great, well, let's get more people together to say, okay, we're all signing up for HVO. So the point is people coming together to say, we're going to move something. And that's where, again, every element when it comes to what you do to build a data center, all components, we should be challenging, rethinking.
Yeah.
Because we've been doing a lot of this the same way for 20 years.
Yeah, and then there's the parallel as well as whether that HVO is better used in transport in cities or to power a CDN. And this is the parallel conversation, which is it's a bridging technology for transport, but to get everybody out of diesel as a backup generator is the first priority. To put it into a HVO, fair enough, but let's get hydrogen on it as well.
And then it goes down to, we have generators for what? Less than 1% of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of capital, a lot of embodied carbon, a lot of waste, a lot of inefficiency. I mean, we're talking tons of money rolled into these. So we need to rethink again.
Yeah.
So for your second question, total life cycle accounting. Yes. Carbon accounting. Yes. So it took me a sec. It really is birth to death. If we're truly doing carbon accounting for that, that means that you have to account for when it is built, how it is used, how many lives it's used for, and then how it's destructed, right? Or decommissioned or recycled. Yeah. And so somebody owns that. To me, this is just simple. It's like any other accounting, gap accounting that we do. Everything has to add up. Mm-hmm. Just change the dollars or the pounds, right? Or the euro into metric tons of CO2e. Yeah. And two challenges we have within carbon accounting right now that we're addressing is that they don't take into account time and reuse. So for example, we're getting a waste stream, turn it into a second life. There is no carbon credit that is attributed to second life, right? They say it's absolute, which means there's no net new carbon, but there's no motivation for people to say, I need to keep this longer. The reason that Google, Microsoft, and Meta all in the last month have said we're extending the life of our servers was sustainability secondary, economics first, driven by supply chain limitations. So what's the forcing function in it, right? So from a carbon accounting standpoint, we're driving the wrong behavior. We should be encouraging people to be able to use something for more of a life, right? And for Cato, we don't care. In the end of it, we know this is the right thing to do, and we're rolling out second life equipment. It's like a certified pre-owned BMW.
Yep.
The thing works pretty well. And guess what? It gets you from point A to B. You can do a lot of work on these things, you know? And so that's the mentality that we have to change, that we're going after. Okay. And then the other side of this is that time. Right now, the ISO carbon accounting requirements are that you have to take the full offset of that thing you build in the year it's built. I understand the reasoning for it. When I built it, I emitted all this carbon to be able to actually build it, right? Whether it's this phone or a generator or a server. I built it and it was deployed. Okay. The problem is literally no one I know is able to accomplish same year offset right now, which means that when you think about accounting, we did this for dollars again. You buy something at $1 million, you depreciate it over a period of time because it has a life. Okay, so there's depreciation of dollars or currency. The problem is we don't have depreciation of carbon because the absolute nature of it is emitted that year. But we have a lot of work to do to try and get to net zero. I mean, a ton of freaking work. Everybody's committed. They don't know how they're going to get there. But these are two factors that I think are limiting us in the ability to actually go make material progress towards carbon reduction. We're driving the wrong behavior.
And that's a really good point on the behavior piece. Let me ask a quick analogy from an accounting standpoint. So you buy something for $1 million, you depreciate it over a certain period of time. small business, you buy something for 50,000, you take section 179 in the States, which allows you to do a full write-off. Is there a model that says full carbon accounting for, particular device infrastructure versus over time for larger infrastructure?
No, it is all absolute. It's the same. It's like 179.
Okay, got it.
You must account for it in the year that it's actually deployed.
Okay. So we've got one other question for the audience that I'm going to throw out. And this has been a really, really good discussion. So FX from Tim, a Paris-based company, said, okay, it's interesting to see that you're doing longer life usage of servers, but until when? As soon as the new generation can do the same compute job for 3 or 4 times less power consumption, then replacing it on a 6-month cycle, et cetera. And I know for us, again, as a nonprofit scientific research organization, as we take old servers, we try to apply new power output methodologies to it to figure out how to sort of elongate the life. How are you handling that? Because that is a valid question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing a lung over here. Okay, I'm actually going to show you something, because this is the thing that drives me crazy. And again, I was one of the people that drove that behavior. So I drove $10 billion worth of infrastructure process, data center hardware, networks, the deployments across, a 30-year period. Within that, every deployment we did, eBay, PayPal, StubHub, Uber, all of them were inefficient. Okay, even though I own that stack part of it, the best we could get was 60% utilization of power in the data center. Okay. The best we could get on the servers, okay, true utilization of the servers was less than 20%. We overbuild everything, okay? So the premise here for me is that 80% of the workload on the internet does not require machine learning, AI, high performance computing, or other niche solutions. Okay, so we keep solving for the 20%, saying everybody's got to have density, everybody has to have liquid cooling, everybody has to have all these things. Yes, we're going to need those. Yes, they're going to grow. But how big is AI right now? It's huge, right? But how much of the actual infrastructure or power workload is it? Right. Less than 5%. Right. Okay, let's say it doubles. Great. Let's say it quadruples. We're at 20%. General purpose compute will be here forever. We need the basics, right? It's like the workhorse trucks that are going back and forth to get things done. So I'm going to show you a picture because I think this will help. This is what we help our cloud customers, right, in their conversion understand. So let's see, is this the one? Yeah. Okay. So if you look at this, this is like an OCP rack that we're deploying. This is one of our standard SKUs. Okay. So inside of that, now when you compare, there's up to 48 servers in that rack, okay? They're 5 years old. This is based on a Broadwell chipset from Intel.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now, guess what they sell on AWS? M1 extra large instances, T2 extra large instances. They are specifically built on the exact same physical chipset, right, and architecture. Okay, so what we have here is to say, great, well then second life equipment, if you start to look at the actual instance, right? One instance is 4 vCPUs, 15 gig of RAM, 1 gigabit of network, 420 gigabytes of SSD. Great. That's an instance, a virtual machine I get on AWS. I would pay 38 cents an hour to rent that one. I would pay $5.30, all right, an hour if I was going to do 14 of those, because by the way, that's what fits on a physical server. This is the exact same architecture that goes up in AWS, GCP, all of them. So now we match apples to apples. Okay, so Broadwell chipset with all the exact same things, and you can get bare metal, and it's half the price of cloud. So start. Then you start to get to the carbon accounting aspects of it. Second life equipment in wasted data center capacity with clean energy. Suddenly you get to carbon free, and it's even cheaper, which is counterintuitive when you think about it. But I think what's important for people to understand is this is happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. People are taking that equipment and utilizing it. And in clouds, they're actually selling this in EC2. They're selling this in spot capacity, right? Reserved or on demand. It's the same literal unit that we're talking about. Does that help?
That absolutely. And as a matter of fact, as we were looking at the less accord and some of the other questions there beyond, say, the compression part of what our industry has done, as you're describing for other industries, is built to peak. And we have to build to peak for certain big events. But the question is, can we build to peak in a better way where there is some sharing of infrastructure, et cetera? So, so there have been several other notes put in the chat. Those of you who are on here, you may want to grab some of those links because it has some points around what Dean had talked about with carbon accounting, questions about cooking the books, et cetera. And Adam, I'm going to ask if you don't mind, grab all the links from this so that those can be put up with the YouTube video when this is put up, because I think there's some really, really good information here. Dean, thank you very much for your time. And obviously we went a little over. I told you 20 minutes. We went almost 40. I think we got some really good details out of this. And thank you again for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for listening. And by the way, thank you for the work you're doing. Greening the Streaming is the real deal. Like we're really excited about what you're accomplishing, and we would love to figure out how this could link, right? Because we're literally trying to go back and accomplish, right, impact. And I think that what you're going to do, because CDN is so huge, streaming is so big, and it's just going to grow, it's going to consume. So what can we do to go back and actually do that incredibly sustainably? We have to. Right. Good. As our contributions. So awesome.
Well, we really appreciate your coming and sort of showing the iMasons model as well, because it helps us understand how we could fit better together. So thank you again for your time. And Adam, I'm going to turn it back over to you.